What happens when a man who has seen the worst of humanity decides to take matters into his own hands? What if this man, overlooked and underestimated by everyone around him, becomes the silent witness to cruelty, and then delivers justice in ways no one could ever expect? Let's dive deeper to see how one ordinary janitor turned an entire school upside down with his quiet revenge. Meet Harold Grayson. He was a tall but thin man in his late 50s, with graying hair that stuck out at odd angles, as if he hadn't bothered to comb it in years. His clothes were always faded and worn, blue jeans patched at the knees, a plain gray sweatshirt stained from years of hard work. But there was something about Harold that made people look away. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes cast downward. Or maybe it was just the fact that he didn't talk much. Harold had been working as the night janitor at Maplewood High School for over 20 years. Every evening after the students left, he'd show up right on time, carrying his mop bucket and broom like they were extensions of himself. He cleaned classrooms, swept hallways, and scrubbed bathrooms until dawn without complaint. To most people, Harold was invisible, just another cog in the machine, doing a thankless job. But Harold wasn't always like this. Before becoming a janitor, Harold had served in the military for nearly 2 decades. He'd fought in wars, faced danger head-on, and lost friends along the way. Those experiences had left scars, not physical ones, but emotional ones that ran deep. When Harold came home, he found it hard to fit back into civilian life. Jobs came and went, relationships fizzled out, and eventually he settled into being the janitor at Maplewood High. It was steady work, predictable, and it gave him peace. Or so he thought. One day, Harold noticed something unusual while cleaning the gymnasium. A group of boys lingered near the lockers long after practice ended. They laughed loudly, their voices echoing through the empty space. Among them was a boy named Marcus Kane. Marcus stood taller than the others, broad-shouldered and confident. He wore a varsity jacket with pride, its sleeves torn at the elbows. Everyone knew Marcus. He was the star quarterback, the golden boy of the school. Girls swooned over him, teachers praised him, and other students looked up to him. But Harold saw a different side of Marcus. As he hid behind a stack of chairs, mopping quietly, he heard Marcus taunting another boy named Calvin Brooks. Calvin was smaller, quieter, and often kept to himself. Marcus called him names, pushed him against the lockers, and even took his phone, throwing it across the room. The other boys cheered Marcus on, laughing as Calvin scrambled to pick up his shattered device. That night, Harold finished his shift in silence, but the image of Calvin's tear-streaked face stayed with him. Over the next few weeks, Harold began noticing patterns. Whenever Marcus walked down the hall, Calvin would shrink back, avoiding eye contact. Sometimes Marcus would trip Calvin in the hallway or steal his lunch money. No one seemed to notice or care. Harold felt anger bubbling inside him, but he said nothing. After all, what could a janitor do? One rainy evening, Harold decided to follow Marcus. He waited until the football team finished practice and followed Marcus to the parking lot, where he climbed into his sleek black truck. Curiosity drove Harold to get into his old sedan and tail Marcus discreetly. He wanted to know more about the boy who thought he ruled the world. The truck led Harold to a small apartment complex on the edge of town. Marcus parked and entered one of the units. Harold sat in his car, watching through the rain-speckled windshield. Minutes later, a man emerged from the building, a man who looked older than Harold expected. His face was lined with worry, and his posture suggested exhaustion. This must be Marcus's father. As Harold watched, the man handed Marcus a wad of cash. Marcus smirked, pocketing the money before heading back inside. That's when it hit Harold. The truth unfolded before his eyes. Marcus wasn't some perfect golden boy. He was using his charm and popularity to exploit those weaker than him. His family struggled financially, and Marcus used bullying as a way to mask his insecurities. This revelation shook Harold. For the first time, he understood Marcus's behavior, but it didn't excuse it. If anything, it fueled Harold's resolve to act. Harold spent days thinking about how to handle the situation. He couldn't go to the principal because Marcus would deny everything, and no one would believe Calvin. Instead, Harold decided to use Marcus's own tactics against him. Using his access to the school's security system, Harold recorded footage of Marcus bullying Calvin during one of their encounters. Then he edited the video to include timestamps and clear audio, making sure every detail was undeniable. Finally, Harold sent the video anonymously to the school board, along with a letter explaining the situation. Days passed, and Harold waited anxiously. One morning as he arrived at school, he noticed a commotion in the main office. Teachers gathered around, whispering nervously. Soon enough, news spread throughout the building. Marcus Kane had been suspended indefinitely. Parents complained, students protested, but the evidence was too strong to ignore. Calvin, however, didn't celebrate. Harold saw him sitting alone in the cafeteria, staring blankly at his tray. Something told Harold that this wasn't the end of the story. A week later, Harold received an unexpected visitor. Calvin approached him during lunchtime, holding a piece of paper in his trembling hands. "Mr. Grayson," Calvin said softly, "I need your help." Harold nodded, inviting Calvin to sit beside him. The boy explained that Marcus had threatened him again, promising revenge once he returned to school. Worse still, Calvin revealed that Marcus had connections with a local gang, and they might harm him or his family. Tears welled up in Calvin's eyes as he spoke. "I don't know what to do," he admitted. "No one listens to me. Not my parents, not the teachers, nobody." Harold placed a reassuring hand on Calvin's shoulder. "You're not alone," he said firmly. "We'll figure this out together." That night, Harold reached out to someone he hadn't spoken to in years, an old friend from the military. This friend worked in law enforcement and agreed to investigate Marcus's ties to the gang. Within days, officers raided the gang's hideout, uncovering evidence linking Marcus to illegal activities. Marcus was arrested, and his future as the Golden Boy crumbled overnight. In the months that followed, Harold became a mentor to Calvin. Together they worked on rebuilding the younger boy's confidence. Harold shared stories of his own struggles, reminding Calvin that strength comes not from power, but from resilience. One evening, as Harold locked up the school for the last time, Calvin surprised him with a heartfelt thank you note. "You showed me that even the smallest voice can make a difference," Calvin wrote. "Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Harold smiled, folding the note carefully and tucking it into his pocket. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose. Though he remained the quiet janitor, Harold knew that sometimes the greatest victories come from the simplest acts of courage. And so, Harold continued his nightly routine, sweeping hallways and mopping floors, knowing that somewhere, somehow, he had changed the world for the better. That's the story, friends. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a pleasure sharing it with you all. Don't forget to comment below and let me know where you're watching from. It's always fun to see the global reach of these stories. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button for more amazing stories, tips, and tricks. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye. If you'd like to show some extra love, tap the 3 dots near the share button and send a super thanks.